The 84th session, Secretary will call the roll.
The Honorable Senator Aquino, Binay, Alan Peter Compañero, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Honasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 83rd Session, 8th of June, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
And
2804 entitled an act establishing a breastfeeding center in every barangay throughout the country, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health, Demography, Finance, Local Government and
Number 2805, an act to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services, Health, Demography, Finance.
Senate Number 2806, an act providing grants to community health workers in order to promote positive health behaviors in women and children, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality, and Finance.
Senate Number 2807, an act requiring government offices, bureaus, agencies, instrumentalities, and affiliates, including government-owned and controlled corporations, to disclose contact information, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Civil Service, Government Reorganization.
Senate Number 2808, an act promoting awareness of chronic fatigue syndrome, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Committees on Health, Demography, Finance.
Senate Number 2809, an act amending Executive Order Number 209, also known as the Family Code of the Philippines, Article 18, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality.
Senate Number 2810, an act to ensure improved accountability of animal experimentation programs.
Agriculture and Food Science and Technology.
Senate Number 2811, act providing access to indigenous cultural communities, indigenous peoples of various information and communication technology by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Community, Cultural Community, Science, Technology, Finance.
Senate Number 2812, an act regulating the sale or distribution of mercury thermometers, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
Senate Number 2813, an act limiting the consecutive hours of work by nurses, Senator Defensor Santiago. Nurses, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development, Health and Demography.
Senate Number 2814, an act providing for fair, equitable terms for the release of medical practitioners' professional fees withheld by hospitals or medical.
Dangerous drugs.
Senate Number 2820, an act creating the non-indigenous species management plan and list. Number 28 for Senator Defensor. 7 of Act Number.
Family Relations, Gender Equality.
Senate Number 2826, an act to prohibit the importation of products made with dog or sold under exceptional circumstances, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Youth.
Senate Number 2830, an act providing for a national data on collection of data on stillbirths in a standard manner, providing for information. Resolution inquiry in aid of legislation. Conservation groups over renovations. Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported complaints of heritage conservation groups over renovation 3096, which was signed by His Excellency President Benigno III. By His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III. Astronomical, providing for other purposes, recommending his approval in substitution of Senate Numbers 10, 158, 842, 955, 1937, to ambulance chase number 2627, House Number 4271, Senators prepared and submitted by the Committees on Labor. Senator author thereof, entitled an act strengthening the operations of the National Labor Relations Purpose Articles 219 and 221 of PD number 442 amended, otherwise known.
Bigat na akusasyon. Tuloy pa rin ang kapit ni General Purisima pangyarihan. Tila malakas ang kapit ang sounds that he was accepting the resignation of Purisima. Mabigat daw sa kalooban ng Pangulo, ang Pangulo ay nagplano ng Oplan exodus, not just from his perch as PS, from his perch as PNP. Point ang ating Pangulo ng permanenteng PNP chief. May nakahanda palang espesyal na plano para kay Purisima. Kung kaya naman exodus, naapektuhan din ang ating President na mabigyan ng katarungan ng ating magigiting na sa charge him in court for usurpation, for violating the for gross misconduct and negligence. Ang po usapang for the pleas of our people to move General Purisima and to bring the killers of our fallen policemen to justice, and for their mementos and personal belongings returned to their loved ones. Please, Mr. President, for the sake of our fallen in peace. In the face of a public outrage, our officials had lavished praise on our Mr. President peace in Mindanao, a Mindanao that would allow our Muslim and Christian and other peace and in harmony with one another. A Mindanao that leaves its past behind and local government is to ensure that our proposed law that has worked legislation together, no matter how it seems, how tedious and drawn out the entire process might feel like. As a Filipino, I do not want any more blood to be spilled between our soldiers and the MILF. We are all Filipinos. We should welcome the clash of ideas, straight that they are partners than the reason of force. Despite the MILF and the Filipino people laws of our land, a document
acknowledged dapat na
I stand before you today to sponsor and humbly seek your support for the passage of Senate Bill number 3, an act providing for a system of absentee national candidates may be exited the Philippines, not otherwise disqualified. Right to suffrage is the essence of our democracy. As a means to increase participation of citizens who date of the election. In 2013, the total number of applicants received for local before disenfranchised because of the current local absentee voting law. While it may seem like a small number, we all know in a democracy they are not of these electoral staff. They are called to perform staff of local candidates to vote for their president, so as to avoid voting system. Was not to actions under on absentee voting and to minimize confusion among the voters and the implementers alike. Ensure a higher voter turnout. Important, promote general involvement of the citizenry in the electoral process. Former United
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move consideration of Senate Bill number 2763, Committee Report number 143, House 739, under Committee Report number 15396, under Committee Report number 159, House Bill number 44 out under their respective committee reports.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. 158, 150, 151, 152, 156, 157. King's Plight, professional seminaries in the legal community. Number of cases that are in the legal community, the sheer number of cases that are filed in our courts makes it all. This equates to a Jose Maida 100 cases per branch, fixed at 5. Has a total combined caseload of 7,329 as of June and exceeds the manageable caseload of 300 for second-level courts. These figures are but a snapshot of the sheer volume of cases that our courts face. Regrettably, the situation that I just mentioned in the courts of Pasay City is the same situation in many other parts of the country. In a society that, according to Father Bernas, looks at the judiciary as the last bulwark of constitutional rights and liberties, it is imperative that we provide the infrastructure to guarantee that our people obtain redress in a speedy and efficient manner. Thus, I am hereby endorsing the House bills I have enumerated earlier, which seek the creation of additional branches in the first and second level courts in the different judicial regions throughout the Philippines, which we foresee will help declog the dockets of the existing courts in the said regions. Through these measures, we shall create 2 branches of the RTC to be stationed in Vigan and Santo Domingo, Ilocos Sur, 3 branches of the RTC to be stationed in the city of Bacolod, which is in Negros Occidental, one branch of the RTC to be stationed in the city of San Jose del Monte, in Bulacan. 2 branches of the municipal trial courts in cities in Angeles City. 1 branch of the municipal trial court for Magalang, and 1 branch for the municipal trial court in cities in Mabalacat, all in the province of Pampanga. 1 branch of the RTC to be stationed in Sorsogon City, Sorsogon. 1 branch of the regional trial court to be stationed in Gihulnan, Negros Oriental. 19 branches of the RTC to be stationed in Quezon City. 2 branches of the RTC to be stationed in Parañaque City, Cavite. And 2 branches of the municipal trial court in cities, and 2 branches of the RTC to be stationed in the city of trial court in cities, and 2 branches of the RTC Filipino Justice
Bill number 3396, 4483, 159, 606, 3396, 4483, 159, 606, 2186, and 2260. Number 283. Under Committee Report number 175, from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar.
The measure is in order.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2831, an act instituting the Philippine Halal Export Development and Promotion Program, creating for the purpose the Philippine Halal Export Development and Promotion Board, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Villar to sponsor the measure.
Senator Villar is recognized.
Mr. President, my fellow senators, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill number 2831 in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 294, 312, 1130, and 1885 under Committee Report number 175, or the Philippine Halal Export Development and Promotion Act of 2015. The consolidated bill is prepared and submitted jointly by the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship and Finance, with Senators Trillanes, Revilla, Defensor Santiago, and this representation as authors. If the government of the Philippines wants to maximize benefit from ASEAN integration, then it should create policies and mechanisms which will support and nurture our local industry, expand its market reach, and more importantly, protect the integrity of our products. Integration fuels movement of people, industries, services, and processes, products to and from different ASEAN countries. This development also signifies the expansion of halal trade all over ASEAN as an inescapable consequence. Halal trade is an industry where Philippines is relatively new but poses huge potential. However, due to the sensitive and special nature of the said industry, due care must be exercised in its dealing in order to foster goodwill and credibility with our trading partners, thereby increasing our market share. Likewise, developing and promoting the halal industry will significantly help farmers and food producers, as well as boost employment opportunities. By adopting measures to make halal exports more competitive, we can make the Philippines an active player in the region and in the global market as a whole. This bill is mainly an export policy which hopes to not only safeguard the integrity of our halal products, but more so to protect the goodwill of our country to our neighboring countries and trade partners. At present, halal standards are considered as technical trade barriers which are imposed by the Muslim countries consistent with their rights provided in the GATT and ATIGA, which states general exception, subject to the requirement that such measures are not applied in a manner which would constitute a means of arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination among member states where the some conditions prevail, or a disguised restriction on international trade. Nothing in this agreement shall be construed to prevent the adoption or enforcement by a member state of measures A, necessary to protect public morals, and B, necessary to protect human, animal, or plant life or health. Therefore, products that do not meet the importing country's requirement for halalness will be deemed haram, or not allowed. For Islamic states which are part of the ASEAN, non-halal products, otherwise known as haram, are considered as immoral, unhealthy, and hazardous. Such unique definition of goods is something that is not subject to an agreement or declaration, since its definition should be left with the reviewing country in accordance with their standards, culture, belief, and tradition. These exceptions pose a huge challenge for Philippine products. Unlike other ASEAN member states, only the Philippines has a strict non-establishment clause which prohibits the state from putting up an organ which will directly certify products as halal. Other countries too are given more flexibility by their respective constitutions to get directly involved in halal certification. However, despite such limitation, the Philippines, as part of its commitment to ASEAN to deliver safe and sanitized goods, must seek to create measures within the bounds of the 1987 Constitution. Wherefore, for export of halal products, regulation is a must as government's assertion of its right to self-defense against malpractices. To highlight, Article 16, Section 9 of the 1987 Constitution provides that the state shall protect consumers from trade malpractices and from substandard or hazardous products. This provision should be appreciated within the context of ASEAN integration, where there will be overlapping relationship between and among ASEAN members. With zero tariff and open market, consumers are expected to transcend territoriality. International consumers become localized, hence must be accorded with protection mandated by our Constitution from substandard and hazardous products as defined and determined by their countries of origin. With different countries imposing port of origin quality assurance inspection and foregoing port of destination inspection, the Philippines, as good neighbor in the exercise of ASEAN brotherhood, must impose quality assurance and set up trade filters to warrant that we only export products that are at par with qualities and acceptability set by the rest of ASEAN. Such is essential to avoid the potential embarrassment of sending out products that are deemed unclean and unsafe based on the standards of the receiving countries. The halal industry is growing fast, and we must seize these opportunities immediately. The global halal food market will be worth $1.6 trillion by 2018. Up from $1 trillion. The halal food sector is set to grow an average rate of 6.9% a year, faster than the food sector in general. By 2018, halal is forecast to make up 17.4% of the world food market. There is also a growing demand for halal products among non-Muslims. The estimates may vary, but the numbers are definitely increasing. Halal producers in the Philippines are well positioned to take advantage of the global halal market. To do so, the government must ensure compliance with international standards by coming up with a comprehensive halal export development program for food and non-food products and services. Those, among others, prompted me and other senators to file our respective Senate bills, which are hereby consolidated under Senate Bill 2831 and presented on Committee Report number 175. The Philippines has a thriving and vibrant Muslim population. Moreover, Mindanao, which is home to about 7 million Muslim Filipinos, is strategically located and can very well become the halal hub of the country and even the rest of the world. It is already being actively promoted or positioned as the halal production center of the country and gateway to the BIMP IAGA or Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippine East ASEAN growth area. The 10 ASEAN countries have become attractive destinations for investments. ASEAN has an aggregate economic size of US $2.3 trillion, a combined population of 616 million. And with the regional economic integration under the ASEAN Economic Community or AEC starting this year, the Philippines and neighboring countries can work even closely together to serve the requirements of the international market. The region itself has become a very ideal market for international halal industry players. Kung talagang desidido at determinado tayo na may posisyon ng ating bansa ng maayos at mas agresibo sa mas magiging competitive pa na regional markets, bungsod ng ASEAN integration, dapat natin tulungan ang mga lokal na industriya sa pamamagitan ng paggawa ng mga polisiya at mga mekanismo na magbibigay suporta at benepisyo sa mga lokal na kumpanya para mas mapalawig pa nila ang kanilang merkado at mas protektahan din ang integridad ng kanilang mga produkto. The regional economic integration signals the expansion of halal trade all over ASEAN countries. We must be ready to be at the forefront. Further, the proposed measure envision a multi-layered approach to halal industry development. The diverse core competency of the different government agencies will be tapped to support the program. This explains the multi-sectoral membership of the Halal Board. We also want to look at halal using a two-pronged approach. The secular aspect of halal, which can be left in the expertise of government agencies, which includes products standardization, sanitary and phytosanitary requirements to government agencies, and its religious aspect, which should be left with the Muslim People's Organization. To reiterate, halal trade is an industry where the Philippines is in a very good position to excel, if only we have legal frameworks in place to support it. The current Philippine legal framework on halal lies with the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, which was given an expanded mandate through Republic Act 9997, signed by President Arroyo in February 10, 2010. Under Section 8, Paragraph H, the NCMP was tasked to promote and develop the Philippine halal industry and accredit halal certifying entities bodies for the utmost benefit of Muslim Filipinos and in partnership and or cooperation with appropriate agencies, individuals, and institutions here and abroad. Its scope, however, is limited only to the domestic realm for the welfare of Muslim Filipinos and has nothing to do with export. And as stated in its declaration of policy, NCMF's competency is mainly on safeguarding the welfare of Muslim Filipinos and not on export and trade. This is reiterated in NCMF's charter, which states, in accordance with existing laws, rules and regulations and subject to the guidelines provided by the Office of the President, promote and enhance the development of domestic trade and commerce among the members of the Muslim Filipino communities. Based on its authority under RA 997, the NCMF nonetheless has issued resolution to govern the halal industry. This include NCMF Resolution 46 issued on December 1, 2011, approving the criteria and guidelines for the accreditation of halal certification bodies and entities in the Philippines. And on July 31, 2012, the NCMF issued NCMF Resolution number 46 on the creation of the Philippine Halal Promotion, Development, and Accreditation Board. At present, there are only 3 NCMF-accredited halal certification bodies or entities. These are the Mindanao Halal Authority, Inc., Muslim Mindanao Halal Certification Board, Inc., and Halal International Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Philippines, Inc. Ganun pa man, may mga naglalabasan rin ng mga internet websites na iba pang halal accrediting bodies. At ang ilan pa ay ina-acknowledge ng Department of Science and Technology at Department Trade and Industry kahit na ang mga ito ay hindi accredited ng NCMF. At noong February 2011, ang DOST Region 12 ay nagbukas ng Halal Laboratory sa Cotabato City. The Halal Laboratory serves as the validating facility for ensuring compliance of Philippine manufacturers to halal standards. A bigger halal laboratory is also being constructed in Coronadal City. At present, the NCMF is conducting seminars or forums to harmonize the initiative activities of the different government agencies involved with halal development. So as it stands now, medyo maraming gray areas at magulo ang sistema ng accreditation. Therefore, a measure which shall tap the core competencies of different agencies while doing it in harmony becomes necessary. With this measure, we strive to have unity in direction but diverse in contribution in developing our halal industry. After all, nobody is an island. Moreover, besides considering its effect on regional trade and bolstering the halal industry's overall market potential, this legislation also aims to protect consumers and users of halal products, processes, and services from unscrupulous and unfair agricultural, manufacturing, and trade practices. Within the context of ASEAN integration, there will be overlapping relationship between and among ASEAN members. With zero tariff and open market, consumers are expected to transcend territoriality. International consumers become localized, hence must be accorded with protection mandated by our Constitution from substandard and hazardous products. Without a halal export legal framework in place, our products become susceptible to doubts from receiving countries. Some fly-by-night certifying bodies may issue certification without duly inspecting the goods. And if products from the Philippines are found to be not at par with international halal standard, we may lose the confidence and goodwill of our trade partners. Hence, the government must act proactively in protecting the integrity of the country's halal exports. The government must take this opportunity to explore the huge economic impact of the halal market, particularly for Mindanao, where majority of halal products come from. The impact of government support for halal industry will significantly benefit the agricultural and manufacturing sectors in Mindanao, including conflict areas. The growth opportunities may even entice the warring factions in those areas, particularly the armed groups, to lay down their arms and join the halal production base. With ASEAN integration, we can anticipate the inflow of investments and surge in job opportunities in Mindanao, which is the Philippines' gateway to EAGA. As much as the government recognizes the right of different Islamic organizations to certify products as halal in the domestic market, export of such products justifies government involvement through regulation of our halal products. The government shall accredit halal certifying bodies to avoid fly-by-night certification bodies. Such accreditation will serve as government guarantee and assurance. Through this bill, we also hope to make it more convenient for companies even from Luzon and Visayas to venture into the halal industry. It posed a win-win situation for Filipinos and the Philippine economy. The halal industry is the kind of business platform which requires direct participation of our Muslim brothers in every step of its production, therefore presenting better opportunities in conflict-torn areas. Sa industriya ng halal, ang mga Pilipinong Muslim ay hindi na maiiwanan. As such, this bill is not an expression of the Philippines' ASEAN spirit of brotherhood and camaraderie, but above all, it is the state's preemptive exercise of the doctrine of parents of the nation, where the state, being the father of his country, is the ultimate guardian of the people, including the oppressed and the marginalized, which in this case are subsistence farmer, fisher folks, tribes, peoples, and impoverished Muslims of Mindanao. Through this bill, the government can give our halal producers a protective blanket and platform for success from impending competition in order to survive, thrive, making them a force to reckon with in the global market. With robust economic support to Muslim farmers, producer industries, a bloodless revolution can be given a fighting chance, which may eventually lead us to inclusive growth and lasting peace. Mr. President, esteemed colleague, I earnestly seek the swift passage of the Philippine Halal Export Development and Promotion Act of 2015. I will provide the senators here present with a copy of the salient features of Senate Bill 2831. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2831 under Committee Report number 175.
Any objection? Any objection? Hearing none. Suspended.
Mr. President, we are in receipt of the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2486 and House Bill number 5610 on cabotage. Copies of the report have been distributed to the senators. And so, Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider the aforesaid Conference Committee report.
Consideration of the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 2486 and House Bill 5610 is in order.
Mr. President, as sponsor of the measure, I move this representation to present the bicameral Conference Committee report.
Senator Bamakino is recognized.
Mr. President, I have the honor to submit a copy of the Conference Committee report with a joint explanation on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2486 and House Bill number 5610, both entitled An Act Allowing Foreign Vessels to Transport and Co-Load Foreign Cargoes for Domestic Transshipment and for Other Purposes, as my sponsorship speech, and consider this read in toto into the records. Mr. President, I move that we adopt the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2486 and House Bill number 5610 on cabotage.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2248 under Committee Report number 179 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
In order.
With the consent of the Senate, Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2248 under Committee Report number 179.
The chair would like to have a copy of the measure. Yes. Can the chair have again the can I have 1 minute suspension? Ano ba ito?
This one. Not amending the vice strengthening. I go to read PS question. Where is it, brother? So siya muna. Hindi kasi sponsorship ka muna. Border later.
Okay. So, NLRC. ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I withdraw the earlier motion, and instead I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 179 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill number 2837 is transferred from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 179.
Any objection? Hearing none, in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2837, an act strengthening the operations of the National Labor Relations Commission, amending for this purpose Articles 219 and 221 of Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Sani Angara to sponsor the measure.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, as acting chairman of the Senate Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, it is an honor to sponsor this measure strengthening the operations of the National Labor Relations Commission. The NLRC is the main government agency tasked to resolve labor and management disputes involving both local and overseas workers. It plays a vital role in the promotion and preservation of industrial peace, which is a significant requirement of national economic development. From 2005 to 2014, or a period of 10 years, NLRC regional arbitration branches handled 434,819 cases, while the Commission handled 158,149 appealed cases. For the first quarter of 2015, NLRC regional arbitration branches handled 17,264 cases, while the Commission handled 3,741 cases. With this sheer volume of cases being filed at the NLRC, it is constantly faced with a challenge to resolve said cases in the fairest, quickest, least expensive, and most effective way possible. On July 27, 2006, Republic Act number 9347 was enacted to rationalize the operation, functions, and composition of the NLRC. The clear intent of this law was to enable the NLRC to perform its mandate efficiently and effectively. Republic Act 9347 increased the number of divisions in the Commission from the original 5 to 8. The 3 additional divisions are now handling appealed cases from the National Capital Region and other parts of Luzon. Positions of Commission attorneys who will assist the Commission in the performance of its appellate and adjudicatory functions were created. However, Republic Act 9347 requires the assignment of labor arbiters to specific arbitration branches and prohibits their assignment to the office of the commissioners as well as their performance of functions of the Commission attorney. Labor management relations is never static, Mr. President. It is dynamic. Of late, new working arrangements have emerged. The boom in the business process outsourcing and knowledge process outsourcing industry has paved the way for new concepts of employment, including the phenomenon of virtual employers. The forthcoming ASEAN integration poses a challenge to traditional employer-employee relationships. With all these changes, the occurrence of labor management disputes is inevitable. Consequently, there will be an upsurge of labor cases with novel and complex issues, and the NLRC must be strengthened and provided with a great degree of flexibility to respond swiftly and effectively by the following. First, increasing the number of commission attorneys assigned to each NLRC commissioner from 3 to 5. Second, removing the prohibition on assigning labor arbiters to perform the functions of commission attorneys or to be detailed to the office of any NLRC commissioners. And third, removing the requirement that labor arbiters be appointed to specific arbitration branches, including the preference that they are residents of that particular region. There is a need to increase the number of commission attorneys assigned to the Commission because their work is not limited to assisting the Commission in the resolution of appealed cases and the performance of its adjudicatory functions, as they also play a vital role in conciliation, mediation of appealed cases in line with the mandate of Section 3, Article 13 of the 1987 Constitution, and Article 211 of PD 442, or the Labor Code of the Philippines as amended, on the use of alternative modes of dispute resolution, even in compulsory arbitration. This is in keeping with the International Labor Organizations, or ILO's thrust on the judicialization of labor dispute resolution. Furthermore, this amendment will allow the NLRC to reduce the process cycle time in the disposition of appealed cases from the present 6 months to 4 months from receipt of records of the cases. The amendments which seek to remove the prohibition on the assignment of labor arbiters to the Commission and the requirement that labor arbiters be appointed to a specific arbitration branch, including the preference that they are residents from that particular region, will provide the Commission with more flexibility in the management of its manpower to meet the upsurge of cases and distribute the workload equitably. This will promote expeditious resolution of labor cases in the Commission. The deletion of the prohibition on the assignment of labor arbiters will enable the Commission to detail labor arbiters in areas where their services are most exigent. The amendments, Mr. President, will likewise provide the Commission with the authority to transfer labor arbiters in the exercise of its administrative supervision and control pursuant to Article 213 of the Labor Code as amended. It is for these reasons that we seek the immediate passage of this bill that will not only strengthen the NLRC but will also ensure industrial peace and imperative of social and economic development. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 179.
The Chair just asked one clarificatory question. Senator Angara, basically this would allow flexibility to the National Labor Relations Commission by having labor arbiters appointed at large.
Yes, Mr. President, and it increases the administrative supervision. It strengthens the hand of the Commission in a sense,
Yeah.
because in certain instances which have been cited to me, some of the arbiters act as if they have a vested right to their position, and they just perform unsatisfactory decisions, and knowing that there is no sanction that is available, they cannot be transferred anywhere else.
Yes. Just to clarify that is the intent
Yes.
of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 179.
So suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2835 under Committee Report number 177 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2835 under Committee Report number 177.
In order.
With the permission of the body, Mr. President, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will do so.
Senate Bill number 2835, an act protecting seafarers and other workers similarly situated against ambulance chasing and providing penalties for violation thereof.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Angara to sponsor the measure.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Majority Leader. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this is the Anti-Ambulance Chasing Act of the Philippines. Mr. President, Ginoong Presidente, sa 1.4 million na onboard seafarer positions sa buong mundo, halos 30% po nito, mga 370,000 po, ay hawak ng mga Pilipino. Dahil po sa kanila, nakakapaglayag ang karamihan sa 79,000 na merchant vessel ng mundo. Dala naman po ng mga merchant vessels na ito ang halos 90% ng mga produktong kinakalakal sa buong mundo. Kasama ang mga sasakyan natin, mga gamot na iniinom, mga damit na sinusuot, mga smartphone, laptop at tablet, hanggang sa rekado na hinahalo po natin sa ating hapunan. Ayon sa World Trade Organization, umaabot sa 118.3 trilyong dolyares ang halaga ng kalakalan na ito. Karamihan nito ay nakasalalay sa sipag at tiyaga ng ating mga seafarers, marino o manlalayag. Klarong-klaro po, Ginoong Presidente, ang napakahalagang papel na kanyang ginagampanan. Mapanganib rin po ang maging isang seafarer. Sari-saring peligro po ang kanilang hinaharap sa karagatan. Sari-sari rin po ang mga dumadating sa ating kwento ng mga manlalayag na nagkakasakit, nasasaktan o kaya namamatay habang nagtatrabaho. Kung kaya't maraming benepisyo at insentibo ang itinatag bilang seguridad at pang-engganyo para sa mga seafarers. Halimbawa, malalaki po ang medical, accident, at death benefits na nailalaan para sa kanila. These monetary benefits range from the benchmark Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, POEA maximum of $60,000 to the higher compensations provided under CBAs or collective bargaining agreements reaching $250,000. Notably, seafarers may likewise be granted disability benefits up to the maximum of $110,000 and death benefits in the sum of as high as $82,500 plus $16,500 for each minor child, but not more than $66,000. Ngunit dahil sa mga benepisyong ito, iilan sa ating mga manlalayag ay pinagsasamantalahan ng iba. Nangyayari po na may mga abogadong nanghuhut-hut at nanlilinlang ng mga seafarers. Minamaniobra nilang batas para kasama sila na makakakuha ng benepisyo. May ilan na tuwirang nananakot ng mga seafarer nang may matinding pangangailangan ng tulong-tulong legal para pumayag sa napakataas na attorney's fees. In some instances, complainants end up signing over to their lawyers the monetary awards granted to them by the court. These legal fees stretch from 30% to as high as 60% of the total amount of the monetary award, and drastically reducing the benefits due to the aggrieved seafarers and their families. Distressing stories abound of seafarers and workers who were convinced or coerced into entering agreements for legal or consultancy services, even when such services are not needed or charged with fees which are excessive and unconscionable. Mr. President, such are only some examples of ambulance chasing. Whatever the act, the common thread is that certain unscrupulous individuals take substantial interest in personal injury cases and resort to questionable practices to recover substantial fees at the expense of hapless seafarers and their families. Often, legal and policy loopholes are exploited. For instance, seafarers or their families are defrauded by ambulance-chasing legal practitioners into filing cases, even if there is no demonstrable merit. The entire ruse hinges on the pretense that seafarers or their families are easily entitled to enormous amounts of medical accident or death benefits. In the Philippines, ambulance chasers capitalize on the fact that decisions of the NLRC or the National Conciliation and Mediation Board are immediately executory. That is, under such NLRC or NCMB decisions, the laborer claimants or seafarers already receive awards on their claims even while appeals are still pending. Records show that reversals of NLRC decisions on seafarer cases issued by appellate courts increased to 98 between 2009 and 2013, representing an aggregate amount of $6,283,485. The claimants involved in these cases already received their benefits, but due to the reversals are now faced with the great difficulty of returning their awards to the ship owners. However, by this time, the claimants would have already paid a huge portion to their lawyers, exacerbating further the conundrum which they face. Ambulance chasing is deplorable, especially when lawyers swear on oath to do no falsehood nor consent to the doing of any in court, and to not wittingly or willingly promote or sue any groundless, false, or unlawful suit, or give aid nor consent to the same. What makes such acts more abominable is that there is ample reason to believe that none of them would have flourished without connivance among the ambulance chasers, physicians, or other professionals dealing with the diagnosis and management of seafarers. Direktang nakakasira ng buhay ng mga marino ang ambulance chasing, ngunit pati buong industriya ay ang naapektuhan. Ayon sa United Filipino Seafarers, unti-unting naging talamak ang ambulance chasing sa bansa. Para nga sa isang tanyag na manning agency, halos 80 na kaso ang kanyang natatanggap kada taon at ilan lang dito ang may merito. Masama po ang epekto nito sa kumpanya, lalo na't obligado siyang sagutin ang mga sinampa. Nangyayari rin na may mga kasong hindi patas ang kinahihinatan. Kamakailan lang nagdesisyon ng NCMB na may merito ang reklamo ng isang seafarer na naputol ang kanyang hinlalato o middle finger at natapesan ang kanyang palasingsingan o ring finger nang nailipat niya ang kanyang kamay sa isang lubricator habang nasa barko. Marapat lang na siya'y bigyan ng benepisyo para ipagamot ang kanyang kamay. Ayon sa isang ulat, 5% disability ang kanyang nadatnan na may kaakibat na 12,500 disability benefit. Ngunit ayon sa desisyon ng NCMB, umabot sa $250,000 plus 10% attorney's fees or 12.5 million pesos ang ginatimpalaan sa nasaktan na seafarer. Ito po ang pinakamataas o ang full disability benefits na maaaring makamtan ng isang aggrieved seafarer. Paano po nangyari ito? Dagdag ba dito? Tuwiran po bang baldado ang maputulan o matapesan ng daliri? Nararapat ba na habang may mga seafarer na tuluyang nagiging incapacitated dahil sa anumang aksidente sa trabaho, may ilan na nakakakuha ng napakalaking benepisyo bagaman nakapagtratrabaho pa sila? Marahil ito po ang naging mga tanong ng ilang ship owner, domestic at foreign bilang reaksyon sa naturang desisyon. Mababasa sa kanilang pag-uusisa ang kanilang pag-aalinlangan sa takbo ng ating sistemang legal at ang global maritime industry ay unti-unting mapapalitan ng pagdududa at pagwawala ng kumpiyansa. Kaya buhat ng naturang desisyon, may ilang ship owners ang nagbantang palitan ang kanilang mga crew na Pilipino sa kanilang mga barko. Nagsisimula ng araw, tumingin ang iba sa India, sa Vietnam at sa China para makahanap ng mga marino. Sabi nga ng isang shipping line na ipupull out na nila ang mga crew nila na Pilipino na 12 sa isang barko. Halos 451.7 million pesos o 10.1 million US dollars raw ang mawawalang kita ng higit ng 270 na seafarers kung ito'y tuluyang mangyayari, Mr. President. Ambulance chasing clearly affects our maritime industry at large, not just the seafarers involved. Indeed, seafarers may lose their source of livelihood, which coincides with the negation of their significant contributions to our economy. Take foreign remittances as an example. Where dollars from abroad have imbued us with macroeconomic stability, the seafaring industry's remittances amounted to 5.22 billion US dollars in 2013 and 5.78 billion US dollars in 2014. These ever-increasing remittances comprise more than 20% of the total remittances into the country, notwithstanding that our seafarers are only less than 5% of the total 10.5 million OFWs around the world. In other words, when seafarers lose their jobs, the nation incurs a significant financial setback. While the Code of Professional Responsibility of Lawyers prohibits ambulance chasing, no statutory provision, however, exists which totally, directly, and expressly prohibits this abominable practice in the enforcement of legal rights. Thus, we must protect our seafarers and our other workers, together with their families, from the deleterious and callous practice through the passage of the proposed measure, an act protecting seafarers and other workers against ambulance chasing and providing penalties for violation thereof. This is the counterpart of House Bill number 2643, proposed by Angkla Party List Representative Jesulito A. Manalo. With the proposed measure, we intend to fill in gaps in the law and discourage the practice of ambulance chasing by the following: prohibiting ambulance chasing or soliciting from a seafarer or other worker similarly situated to pursue a monetary claim or benefit against an employer. Secondly, limiting the attorney's fees to only a maximum of 10% of the compensation awarded, where its payment to the attorney is not due until the complainant, seafarer, or worker is actually paid. And thirdly, setting the penalty for ambulance chasers and those in collusion to be anywhere between 50,000 pesos to a maximum of 100,000 pesos and or imprisonment of 1 to 2 years. Ginoong Presidente, kayo po, tulad natin, ay mga membro din po ng legal profession. Ngunit kahit anong paaralan ang pinanggagalingan, lahat ng abogado ng bansa ay nagsumpa na maging tapat na alagad ng ating konstitusyon at ng ating mga batas. Mga batas po dapat ang mamayani sa ating lipunan, hindi ang pagmamaneobra nito. Itinalaga sila para sa ikabubuti ng taong bayan, hindi para sa pandaraya, panlilinlang o pang-aabuso. Kaya, Ginoong Presidente, hiling po namin sa ngalan ng ating mga marino, maging ng mga manggagawang Pilipino, na agarang maipasa at may sa batas ang panukalang ito. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Angara, the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2835 under Committee Report number 177.
So suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2838 under Committee Report number 180 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2838 under Committee Report number 180.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read it.
An act,
Title of the measure.
an act to establish the Archipelagic Sea Lanes in the Philippine Archipelagic waters, prescribing the rights and obligations of foreign ships and aircraft exercising the right of Archipelagic Sea Lanes passage through the established Archipelagic Sea Lanes and providing for the associated protected measures therein.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Angara to sponsor this measure.
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues. It's an honor to sponsor this committee report on behalf of our chairperson, Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, and as Vice Chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Mr. President, as Vice Chair of the committee, I rise in this august chamber to sponsor Committee Report number 180 regarding Senate Bill 2838. The foregoing measure is otherwise known as the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act and rounds up the country's drive at putting its so-called archipelagic house in order. Our starting point is the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, or the UNCLOS, which came into force in the Philippines in 1994. UNCLOS provides a comprehensive legal framework for all activities in the oceans and seas. It defines the rights and responsibilities of nations with respect to their use of the world's oceans, thereby promoting peaceful uses of the seas and oceans, the equitable and efficient utilization of their resources, and the protection and preservation of the marine environment. In 2009, the country enacted the Philippine Archipelagic Baselines Law, RA number 9522, adopting new baselines that are consistent with the UNCLOS. By delimiting Philippine maritime territory as such, RA 9522 finally formalized the country's status as an archipelagic state some 15 years after UNCLOS came into full force in the Philippines. UNCLOS mandates archipelagic states to respect the rights of vessels from other user states to pass through their archipelagic waters for continuous and expeditious passage. Simply, foreign ships and aircraft, including military vessels, bear the right to unhindered passage, that is, to merely pass through another country's so-called archipelagic sea lanes, so long as their flag state is party to the UNCLOS. This right is what is known as the Archipelagic Sea Lanes Passage, or ASLP. The UNCLOS also provides that an archipelagic state like the Philippines has the right to designate particular sea lanes called Archipelagic Sea Lanes, or ASL, where the ASLP can be exercised. This is intended for an archipelagic state to rationalize such passage in accordance with its national and domestic considerations. This is the primary intention of the foregoing measure, Mr. President. Through this proposed bill, we seek to rationalize our sea lanes, thereby assuring the safety and security of foreign vessels navigating through our waters. In doing so, we ultimately uphold national security and support other national interests, such as the preservation of marine biodiversity. Salient features of this bill include the following: the presidential authority to designate the ASLs. Domestically, it imbues the President with the authority to designate, through executive issuance, the actual archipelagic sea lanes and promulgate rules and regulations aimed at protecting not just the ships and vessels passing through, but also the area through which they are traversing. A national coast watch system. It also institutionalizes the following: first, the National Coast Watch System, or NCWS, currently under the control and supervision of the Office of the President, as the foremost mechanism for coordinating the movements of relevant government agencies towards implementing the provisions of this proposed measure. Secondly, the National Coast Watch Council, NCWC, that will provide technical support to the President in designating these sea lanes. And third, the National Coast Watch Center, or the NCW Center, that will establish, monitor, and implement protective measures over the designated sea lanes. Internationally, the measure prescribes the duties and obligations of ships and aircraft passing through the designated archipelagic sea lanes in order to protect the country's various maritime security interests. For instance, foreign vessels are allowed to deviate only up to 25 nautical miles from either side of the axis lines of the ASLs and will refrain from any threat or use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of the Philippines. They are also asked not to expel oil or dump waste into Philippine waters and are held liable, including their flag states, for any loss or damage arising from any instance of non-compliance with this measure. Meanwhile, foreign aircraft exercising their right to archipelagic sea lanes passage shall not land in Philippine territory unless distressed or forced to do so by force majeure. Furthermore, no foreign vessel can conduct any fishing operation, marine resource extraction, or even research and oceanographic survey along these sea lanes unless expressly permitted in law. If the Philippines does not exercise the right to designate ASLs, or archipelagic sea lanes, other states can exercise the right of passage through the routes normally used for navigation, as mentioned in the UNCLOS. This phrase does not have any precise meaning or definition and is largely open to the interpretation of other states. Absent of any designated archipelagic sea lanes, foreign vessels could theoretically move through any of our archipelagic waters unhindered. Clearly, the Philippines must designate its own particular archipelagic sea lanes to ensure the protection of its territorial, security, economic, environmental, and ultimately its sovereign interests. Consistent with other efforts of the Philippines to harmonize its domestic laws with international law, the designation of archipelagic sea lanes will also boost the standing of the Philippines in the international community by sending out a strong signal that it adheres to the rule of public international law. This in turn strengthens the Philippines' position and advocacy to establish a rules-based approach in settling international disputes, including the West Philippine Sea issue. In view of the foregoing, it is important that the passage and approval of the bill be given priority. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Angara. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2838 under Committee Report number 180.
Suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127. This is the bill on the Cebu 7th Legislative District, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is the sponsor had already delivered his sponsorship speech last May 6. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
The period of interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And we recognize also, Mr. President, Senator Osmeña to interpellate on the measure.
In the period of interpellation, Senator Osmeña is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the kind sponsor yield?
Thank you. Yeah, certainly, Mr. President, to the gentleman from Cebu.
Thank you. My query, Mr. President, lies not so much in the...
Excuse me, Senator Osmeña. We cannot hear from here.
Our query of the sponsor refers not so much to the specific 7th Legislative District, to which this representation has no objections, but to the policy that Congress all of these years has been following, whereby a new district can be created if 250,000
Population.
people can be proven to populate that district. Now, I heard in on May 27th, the sponsors say that we seem to be the only country in the world that keeps on adding congressional districts. The United States Congress, for example, Mr. President, started off with 435 legislative districts, and that was in 1778, and today they still have 435 legislative districts. In other words, they merely reshape existing districts according to the way the population has developed. Do you feel, Mr. President, that does the good sponsor feel that we may be able to put a limit to the number of districts we keep on creating? Because I foresee the day, the way our population grows, that we might end up with 500 legislative districts.
Well, it is of my opinion, Mr. President, that there is, in fact, actually there is a limit in the Constitution. The limit is 250 congressional districts, although there is an option to increase that limit if we pass a law so doing. In my view, in my opinion, I do not feel that it is as a practical matter that we should just continue to add districts, because what is really happening is that the political concerns are becoming the paramount reasons for the availment of that constitutional option of having a district every time a population of 250,000 is reached. So again, if we make very rough and ready arithmetic at 100 million divided by 250,000, we should be already 400 districts. So At which point, when do we stop? What is the ideal? Number? In my opinion, I think that we should stick with the limit as it is stated in the Constitution, and at 250. Perhaps it will be time to revisit the concept behind that and make it a hard limit and no longer pass a law to increase that limit. I think 250 members of Congress who represent a congressional district is a good number for the area that the Philippines covers.
Yes, I agree with you, Mr. President. 250 seems like a reasonable number. But doesn't the 250 include 20% party list members?
No, the 250 are only include the congressional districts. The party list members are an additional number. We stand presently at 234 congressional districts. The party list representatives are 56. That is why we have a total now of 290 total congressmen sitting in the House of Representatives.
Well, Mr. President, this representation would like the sponsor to know that he would be very interested in co-authoring or co-sponsoring any peculiar or particular amendment, whether to the Constitution or to any existing law, that would really put a brake on the creation of additional districts simply because of the growth in population. I feel that would be untenable. You will have to build a new batasan.
That's right.
every 50 years, and that would not be practical. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome any assistance that we can get from the gentleman from Cebu in that regard. It is something that we have been discussing in the Committee of Local Government, and I believe the consensus is that we should at some point put a limit. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Osmeña. Thank you, Senator Marcos.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127.
So suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2712 under Committee Report number 117. This is the bill on expanded National Integrated Protected Area System, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
May I suspend, Mr. President, for a second?
Suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Resumed.
Mr. President, I withdraw my motion. And I move that we resume the period of interpolations for House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127, Mr. President.
We first resume consideration of the measure. Have we resumed consideration? Is the measure on the table already? Not yet.
We resume consideration. I move that we resume consideration, Mr. President.
So resumed, yeah.
Mr. President, no other senator signified their intention to interpolate, so I move that we close the period of interpolation, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, so closed.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments.
So opened.
I move, Mr. President, that we recognize Senator Marcos, who is the sponsor of the measure.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one very simple committee amendment, Mr. President. On page 2, line 9, delete the word Bolijun, B-O-L-I-J-O-O-N, and in lieu thereof, insert the correct spelling of the municipality of Boljun, which is B-O-L-J-O-O-N. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, as that is the only committee amendment, I move that we close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
So closed.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension.
Mr. President, I move to resume.
Session resumes.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of individual amendments for this measure.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there was no senator who signified their intention for individual amendments, so I move that we close the period of individual amendments, Mr.
So
President.
closed.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127.
Any objection here? None.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127.
Approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2712 under Committee Report number 117. This is the bill on expanded national integrated protected area system, Mr. President.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the sponsor had already delivered her sponsorship speech last March 18. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Legarda.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
And I also move, Mr. President, to recognize Senator Angara to interpolate on the measure.
Senator Angara is recognized to interpolate on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. Few questions if the sponsor is willing.
Yes, of course. My pleasure, my honor, Mr. President, from the good senator from Aurora.
Actually, Mr. President, I'd like to place on record that these questions came from the office of Senator Pia Cayetano. As we know, she's not able to propound these questions personally, and I would like to manifest that I'm personally adopting them as my own, since I understand that is the correct procedure, Mr. President. If I may proceed.
Let me just put on record, Mr. President, that this interpellation by your honor from the office of Senator Pia Cayetano is really much appreciated. As a matter of fact, this representation wholeheartedly agrees that each protected area should sooner or later be covered by legislation that particularly addresses the individual needs of that protected area, and such has been the intent of the BMB from the beginning. However, it is precisely in this interim period, while these individual protected areas are being crafted and debated, while experience is being gained as to the specific requirements of each site, that we need to have this amended NIPAS Act to take into effect. It was Senator Coco Pimentel yesterday who questioned that why did it take Congress 25 years to be able to enact only 13 protected areas, and now we still have 100. So I thank your honor for taking the time to ask these questions for clarification.
Thank you, good sponsor. A known advocate for the environment, as given by her brilliant privileged speech yesterday on the occasion of Environment Day and Oceans Day. But if I may be allowed, Mr. President, to read the preliminary remarks by Senator Cayetano to her questions, where she mentions that the enactment of a landmark legislation for the declaration and establishment of protected areas has been among her primary advocacies since she was a neophyte senator back in 2004. She was previously chairperson of the Senate Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, and along with the Protected Areas and Wildlife Bureau of the DNR and passionate advocacy groups, they successfully passed site-specific protected area bills such as Republic Act 10067, the Tubataha Reefs Natural Park of 2009, which came into vital use during the recent oil spill incident. Other protected area bills passed into law were Republic Act 9487, or the Mount Banahaw San Cristobal Protected Landscape of 2009, Republic Act 9486, or Central Cebu Protected Landscape Act of 2007, and Republic Act 9494, or Mimbilisan Protected Landscape Act of 2007. For past Congresses, Senator Cayetano has filed, heard, and refiled these individual protected areas in the end view of enacting legislation. Thank you. which will fully protect these areas while considering their unique features and situations. According to the good sponsor and the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the DNR, the proposed expanded NEPAs or e-NEPAs or Senate Bill 27126 to cover in one bill 97 protected areas, including 5 of those which have no presidential proclamation of yet, instead of separate protected area bills which will consume more time. They relate that this intention was to give urgent protection to our depleting natural resources, to pave the way for more efficient prosecution of violations, and promote faster access to funding. As such, this bill will create more rights and diminish existing rights. And though there will be subsequent site-specific legislations to address the various nuances of each protected area, in the interim, however, there may arise confusion and conflict. Thus, the need to enact site-specific bills to address the unique features of these protected areas. Then this need to enact site-specific bills to address the unique features of these protected areas persists. First question, Mr. President, good distinguished sponsor, pertains to the Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park. It's currently managed by the city government of Puerto Princesa on the basis of a MOA or Memorandum Agreement, which the city government and the DNR entered into. The said MOA provides opportunity to develop the basic services, facilities, and functions of DNR, including protected areas and wildlife concerns, to the city government. Does the e-NEPAS bill contain a provision on such special arrangement, or will this only be clarified in a site-specific legislation, since this is an arrangement unique to this protected area?
Mr. President, the MOA between DNR and Puerto Princesa may subsist even after the passage of the e-NEPAs. And in fact, the lessons learned therefrom can be legislated in a draft bill after the e-NEPAs already addresses the system-wide issues. The site-specific bill may or may not include the co-management arrangement, as there is no certainty that the PPC-LGU will always be interested in such co-management. And enshrining such an agreement which exists now in legislation will therefore tie down the parties to an arrangement that may not always be beneficial in the long term. But this MOA, which exists now, exists already, even as it is a PA, and after the e-NEPAs is enacted into law and it becomes a national park.
Thank you, good sponsor. Within the Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park, there are existing resorts. What does the e-NEPAS bill state on this, on these resorts or economic features of the said protected area?
There's actually a section in the NEPAS measure, Mr. President, on respecting the present existing facilities in the inventory, especially pertaining to this area. If I may put on record existing rights, all vested property and private rights within the protected area and its buffered zones already existing and or vested upon the effectivity of this act shall be protected and respected in accordance with existing laws, provided that the exercise of such property and private rights shall not contravene the provisions of this act, the individual presidential proclamation, or the implementing rules and regulations of each protected area.
Thank you, Mr. President. Moving on to the Chocolate Hills Natural Monument, where the basis is Presidential Proclamation 333, Series of 2003, which excludes the alienable and disposable flat and rolling land in between hills. These hills are a unique landscape that, as a continuum, must be addressed as contiguous land. How does e-NEPAS address this peculiarity? Are the flat and rolling lands between the hills included or excluded in the declared protected area? And is there a need to pass a site-specific bill?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. In fact, that's the reason why e-NEPAS is much needed, because the boundaries as delineated by the NAMRIA precisely addresses these issues, with the Biodiversity Management Bureau or the BNB ensuring that the areas shall be covered by the said map. Alienable and disposable land, or A&D, over which no prescription has lapsed, would then revert to the classification of national park under the e-NEPAS, thereby making e-NEPAS critical to the Chocolate Hills Natural Monument.
I see. Mr. President, there is a continuing mandamus or order of mandamus issued to the Taal Volcano Protected Landscape on agreed activities such as regular monitoring and assessment of water quality and health of the Taal Lake in the said area. In the absence of site-specific legislation, how will INIPAS affect this mandamus order?
The mandamus, Mr. President, and the consent decree covering the Taal Volcano Protected Landscape was necessary precisely due to the issues that the INIPAS addresses. And once the boundaries are in the prosecution of fishing, fish cage, as well as pollution violations can then proceed with the element of its commission within a duly established protected area not being an issue. As you recall, Mr. President, in 92, this is when all these protected areas were declared. Pero kung gagamitin po sa Tagalog, parang manipis. After that, it was just said it's a first component and then there's a presidential proclamation. So we need to legislate it in Congress and not just use the term presidential proclamation para magkaroon po ng ngipin ang batas. At yun po ang kadahilanan kung bakit po natin ginagawa tong INIPAS para mapatibay po ang batas that will address the issues that brought about this continuing mandamus.
Mr. President, another important facet of the Taal Volcano protected landscape is the existence of the endemic species Tawilis and Duhil. How will the INIPAS ensure protection of these species? And the same goes with the dugong, which exists in the Pujada Bay.
At this time, Mr. President, the Unified Rules and Regulations on Fisheries issued by the TVPL, the Taal Volcano Protected Landscape Area Management Board, or the PAMB, already addresses the threats to the Tawilis, which is my favorite, by declaring a closed season and limiting the adverse impact of aquaculture on Tawilis. Furthermore, the management plan establishes a sanctuary for Tawilis, and these have proven effective as an effective deterrence in the interim. However, depending on the results of ongoing biodiversity inventory funded by USAID through a grant, there may be need for more stringent regulations and criminal penalties and more targeted responses, such as the establishment of multiple sanctuaries and the setting of criminal penalties for harvesting Tawilis therein.
Mr. President, moving to the Bataan Natural Park, or NP, where land speculation or the buying of non-existent land rights is a persistent problem. Furthermore, Bataan NP is among the 5 protected areas with no presidential proclamations. Is this addressed in the INIPAS, or should there be a site-specific legislation to address these rights not recognized under existing land laws?
Yes, you're correct, Mr. President. In fact, this INIPAS, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President, just so that I have an accurate term. Ready, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. I simply wanted to make sure my terms are correct. This INIPAS actually allows Congress to establish protected areas directly, and while there could be presidential proclamations, Congress has the power to designate protected areas and national parks as well. And regarding your question on rights not recognized, as I said earlier in the previous question, the provisions on private rights and existing facilities in the INIPAS and the prohibitions will sufficiently address these issues in the Bataan National Park. This goes actually for all, that provision on prior rights and existing rights of those who have developed within that area, as long as they don't contravene the existing law.
Thank you, distinguished sponsor. Mr. President, the Buena Vista Protected Landscape is also an archaeological site inside a protected area. How will the INIPAS approach this unique combination Should this be in a site-specific legislation, since securing the historical relevance of the said protected area is also a priority?
That's a good question. In fact, this representation, just like you and Senator Pia, many of us here are very much concerned about historical relevance of archaeological sites in many parts of our country. Yes, indeed, a site-specific bill for Buena Vista can be filed, but should only be filed once a specific archaeological timelines, values, and protection measures that need legislation are determined. And until then, what is needed is an improvement of the system-wide laws that apply, which the INIPAS would address.
Madam Sponsor, Mr. President, the Biri La Rosa protected landscape is a UNESCO-declared natural monument, given its rock formations which have geological significance. Although INIPAS provides for the prohibition of acts of defacing, it is imperative to craft a site-specific bill that will give special protection to these rock formations. Would the good sponsor agree with that statement?
Well, nothing would stop, and in fact, if a site-specific legislation would protect it further, we would be supportive of that. It probably would be imperative to do that. But such legislation that protects rock formations and shapes as well as topography can be more fully discussed if they do not have to be tackled together with system-wide issues that can be dispensed with through the system-wide amendment of the NIPAS Act. Nothing can stop us in the future from further enhancing already the existing INIPAS, which will cure the what is lacking in the 1992 NIPAS law.
Thank you. Mr. President, the following protected areas are also active volcanoes: Taal Volcano Protected Landscape, Bulusan Volcano Natural Park or NP, Mayon Volcano NP, Mahagnao Volcano NP, and Mount Timpong and Hibok-Hibok NP. How does the INIPAS address this peculiarity? Will there be a need to pass legislation which will specify the inclusion of PhilVox as a member of the PAMB and the Declaration of Danger Zones?
May I request for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Nalala ko yun. Magalit siya, di ba?
Ready to resume, Mr. President. Ready, Mr. President. So, Mayon and Taal. Where's Hibok-Hibok? Kamigyan. Where is Bulusan?
Source sagot natin yung Bulusan.
Mahagnao. Mount Timpong. Ba't hindi ko lang naraman itong Timpong? Sige, okay na ba? Thanks. We're ready, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. The PhilVox sits actually in as a member in two of these sites, namely Mayon and Taal, and neither the site-specific bill in the future, if any, nor the INIPAS, which we're deliberating on now, are necessary to make such membership effective. What I'm trying to say is that the PAMB can immediately include the PhilVox as a member of the PAMB. Now, as your question on the Declaration of Danger Zones, we already have the geohazard maps of the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and we should use these geohazard maps in the determination of danger zones. These are also identified in the management plan as they could actually change, and therefore there is no need to cement them in legislation. These are operational details on the ground that does not need site-specific legislation in the future. The PAMBI can simply include or exclude the FIVOCs. I believe they should be included as they are in Taal and Mayon. The danger zones already incorporated in the multi-hazard risk maps and the geohazard maps of the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and the PAMBI should take this into consideration.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. Moving on to the Northern Negros Natural Park, which has an existing town site reservation in Salvador San Benedicto. How does the INIPAS approach this unique feature of the said protected area? The existence of a town site within a protected area, which is also deemed as a geohazard-prone area, requires a site-specific bill to address these unique features that pose a threat to both the protected area and the town site.
May I have 1 minute suspension, Mr. President? Multiple use zone, and then geohazard. Because it is because it's a national park, it is uninhabited. People think Ready to resume, Mr. President. People think if it's protected area, walang tao. Yes. Mr. President, just so that it's clear, this existing town site reservation within this Northern Negros National Park, Salvador San Benedicto, can coexist with the protected area as it does now and will be respected by the national park, Mr. President, and it falls under the multiple use in the zoning. As to the geohazard prone areas, Mr. President, as also stated in number 7 in your previous question, that's the reason why we are very we are pushing for the clear usage, effective utilization of all our geohazard maps, so that this geohazard maps will be the guide of local governments in the utilization or non-utilization of their properties. So again, site-specific legislation is no longer necessary because we have the tools, Mr. President. We have the geohazards. Every year, every budget, I ask the MGB, which I will do again in July. Have you given each LGU your geohazard map? Have you explained to them how to use it? Do you tell them where the no-build zones are, etc.? Sometimes, Mr. President, we have the idea that a protected area, in this case, the national parks, are uninhabited utopias or paradise. No, Mr. President, these are populated areas as long as we respect the laws, national and local legislation, and they don't contravene existing laws. These townships can actually coexist with that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few more questions. If we move to take the example of the Turtle Islands Wildlife Sanctuary, which is a distant sanctuary. The migration of nationalities is a common problem in the said area because these islands are in fact nearer to Malaysia than the Philippines, which makes it difficult to prosecute violations because of the availability of courts. From our reading, INIPAS does not specify in detail how to address such a specific concern. Any comment from the sponsor, Mr. President?
Mr. President, you're speaking of the distance of the Turtle Islands Wildlife Sanctuary, and the migration of persons of nationalities crisscrossing between Malaysia and the Philippines. Mr. President, with or without the INIPAS, this issue will remain unresolved until and unless a court will decide and customs, immigration, and quarantine services, etc., are established in the Turtle Islands, which has a population of 3,700 and is 13 hours by boat from Bongao, the capital of Tawi-Tawi, Mr. President. This, however, is no reason not to include it in the INIPAS, which addresses the other problems besetting the area that are systems-wide. In fact, all the more we must include it in our protection mechanism, Mr. President, para paigtingin po natin ang ating mga tools to protect the Turtle Islands Wildlife Sanctuary because it is so far from us. So we must allow or give them the tools to be able to not only monitor and assess, but give them the stricter authority to be able to implement our environmental laws in that area.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Actually, Senator Pia no longer has any questions. She just closes with a statement that having gone through the process of hearing these bills during her chairmanship and having drafted bills before and after meticulously reading the useful papers from the Office of the Good Sponsor and the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DNR, her concerns continue to lie with the interim plan of the agencies while the subsequent site-specific legislation takes effect. The INIPAS is a general law which she feels will not address the nuances of each of the protected areas. There's no more question, Mr. President. I think just wanted to place that on record, and I'd like to thank the good sponsor for her graciousness in addressing the concerns of Senator Pia.
Thank you
Mr.
very
President.
much. If I may, Mr. President, this principal system-wide legislation is 25 years old and has determined the process for establishing each individual protected area and the legislation that would cover it. And some of these sites whose management profiles are fairly simple, site-specific legislative enactments will not be quite so needed if some system-wide problems are addressed. In short, nothing will stop us in the future for improving, enhancing site-specific legislation, but at least, hopefully, with the passage of this measure, those with simple concerns will already be covered. And then perhaps we can add whatever unique vulnerabilities there are in that area. I would like to thank Senator Angara for his kindness in propounding the questions of my esteemed colleague, Senator Cayetano, who I'm sure would share in the advocacy of protecting more areas in our country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you again, Mr. President, dear sponsor.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2712 under Committee Report number 117.
Session is suspended. Consideration of the measure is suspended.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President. Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session.
Mr. President, we have some administrative matters. With the permission of the body, I move that we designate the following as members of the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2679 and House Bill number 4591. For the majority, Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Alan Cayetano, Senator Sani Angara, and Senator Cynthia Villar. For the minority, Senator Vicente Soto III. Mr. President, I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, June 10, 2015.
Any objection? Hearing none. Session is adjourned until Wednesday, June 10, 2015 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.